I kept asking myself these questions, and I kept looking more and more and more into Christianity, and I just kept coming up blank. You know, under the guise of tolerance, we are penalized if we advocate holding a certain truth. So we're coerced into thinking like there is no ultimate answer. I began to really hold the belief that my personality, the same personality of the girl who would pray to God as a child, was like a disability. I noticed that the Quran was playing almost everywhere we went, and there was just something about it that was honestly so moving in a way that I hadn't imagined before. And that was the first time after all of this like spiritual death, that I felt, wow, I feel so happy. It was a real feeling of happiness, just to feel like, yeah, reality is coming back to my life again. I'm starting to almost wake up. It was just so much of an emotional journey that I couldn't put it into words, and I kept just bursting into tears randomly, not knowing, having all of these questions, and basically that were based in fear, like what's going to happen to me? I'm a Muslim now. Because I'd already kind of come to terms with the fact that this religion is for me, and then I had to just take a leap of faith. One verse from the Quran could just release so much psychological tension and release so much angst in terms of really searching for the answer where you seem you can't find it from anywhere else. And I'm like, that is the word of God.
Today's guest is from the UK. She accepted Islam in 2015. She is about to launch a new free interactive workshop for reverts. It will be fully online and hopefully ready in Ramadan. The motto is Surviving and Thriving, My First Year After Shahada. Today's guest is Crystal. Hello, Crystal.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you too. How are you today?
I'm fine, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Crystal, so you've been a Muslim since 2015. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at now and, you know, what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I'm a revert of 5 years, alhamdulillah. I'm living in the UK at the moment. I'm a mother to my beautiful 4-year-old daughter, and I'm studying and working at the same time. So juggling all the balls at the moment.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about your conversion to Islam and your story and how it all happened?
Sure. I guess it makes sense to go back to the beginning. I was brought up by a Persian French mother and an English father. My mother left Shia Islam and became a Christian when she met my father. So I was brought up as a Christian, and I was very much a part of the church. We used to sit in on Bible study classes, and it was hugely influencing to my upbringing. Basically, my mother was studying to become an ordained minister. I always grew up with the concept of God, and I really clung to that. Even as a young kid, I used to pray a lot, and I used to always ask that God would use me to do works of good. However, I noticed more and more, especially as I grew up, that my feelings towards what I witnessed within the church was mismatched. Even as a young child, I think that you know when something is going against your gut instinct. So I was being faced with a really tough decision as the time led on, that I felt such peace being in the presence of God, but I felt like I had to choose one or the other. if I didn't believe necessarily in what the people around me, I didn't believe basically in what they stood for. I felt like there was quite a lot of hypocrisy, to be frank. But I still tried to cling on to this belief that I held that, you know, God is about everything to do with goodness. However, I still struggled with this notion of accountability. I noticed that people often didn't do what they meant. People would portray themselves as one way while hiding a secret identity from coming out. Basically, I wanted to have my belief that would really serve me. So I kept asking myself these questions, and I kept looking more and more and more into Christianity, and I just kept coming up blank.
What age were you at this point?
At this point, like at the beginning of the timeline, obviously it was from as young as I can remember. And then when I started to ask those more in-depth questions, I was probably hitting around the 10-year-old mark, but obviously it was very age appropriate. But the noticing of the contradictive behavior was from very young. I just started to, it grew, the unease inside of myself grew and grew and grew until 10 years old, when I started to be able to articulate these questions to myself. By the time I hit my teenage years, it was almost as if I started to become in loss spiritually, because religion had lost all functionality in my life. I didn't understand what the purpose of religion was, and I couldn't understand how God had seemingly become irrelevant to my struggles and irrelevant to aiding me, irrelevant in guiding me. I couldn't get to grips with that. So I thought, and I also noticed it with the people around me, I felt like the more you look at people and the way you look at the way people interact with people, we're all not very far from falling prey to these same baseline traps, you know, greed, laziness, cowardice, dishonesty, weakness. It really paved the way to these two deeply beneficial realizations that we really are all on the same playing field. We really are, you know, as human beings, you are a product of what you do. You want free choice. We have free choice. And it's about, you know, we are special because of what we choose to do or not. These are the things that started to become apparent to me as I grew older and older now, coming into my early teens. I was really, you know, in your early teens, it's very much peer pressure. You want to fit in. And I started to really get that huge influence of society, all the while like battling these deep questions inside. But still, I noticed that I felt everyone I knew was lost. And I felt shame to believe, even at the time I didn't know what it was, but I felt shame to believe that there was an absolute solution, because, you know, under the guise of tolerance, we are penalized if we advocate holding a certain truth. So we're coerced into thinking like there is no ultimate answer. Most people say, you know, very off the cuff, what is the meaning of life? Oh, who could really know? Who could possibly have an answer to that? Or, you know, even going as far as to saying, you know, subhanAllah, that person must be brainwashed. So these were all subtle ways of me taking footsteps away from religion. I tried going into my, like, that was about 13, 14, 15. And then when I was about 16, I tried one last time with the church, even though I'd almost given up on going for years. I tried one last time with the church just because I was so seeking to reconnect with that goodness. I was so seeking to reconnect that, like, really there must be a more noble purpose for humanity. This cannot be it. We can't just be all wandering around in circles. basically falling prey to the same things that we inflict on others. And I just, like I said, I felt like everyone I knew was lost. And of course, that also was linked to me losing more and more that sense of self that was, you know, strong enough to say, this is me, even though I'm completely living against the grain of what I feel society is. This is me, and I'm really still seeking the truth. So yeah, cutting back to going again to the church for the last time, there was this moment, this really clear moment in my mind. I remember I was sitting in a Bible study group on a Saturday night, and the lady who was running it said to me that Jesus was knocking on my heart, and for us to be able to seek from God, we have to open the door to tell Jesus our concerns and our worries, so that Jesus, you know, peace upon him, must relay that to God. And I just, do you know, it's a question that a lot of people considering Islam struggle with. Why do I have to, why is there a block between myself and God? Why is there a block between myself and my creator? And it was really hitting home for me with everything that had been going on internally. And I was like, yes, actually that is it. This religion is not for me anymore. It's just a block between me and my creator. And despite being very lost and not knowing where to turn to next, I left. I decided to leave. Shortly after that, I think it was even, yeah, I had really turned towards a very stereotypical life of just trying to conform. And basically I felt like I had almost an ultimatum set in front of me, like either you believe in what, if you want everything to make sense and you want, you know, to be validated, then conforming to society and conforming to, like, not knowing an answer and not even seeking an answer is what's befitting, basically. So that went on for a really long time, and it drained me. It really it drained me, and I felt like more and more alienated. And at the worst point of it, I think I began to really hold the belief that my personality, the same personality of the girl who would pray to God as a child, was like a disability, which is obviously a very concerning thought to have. And it was at the age of 21 that I visited Egypt first, and then I liked it so much there that I just decided to pack up and leave. And,
Can I step in there?
Sure.
Just a little bit before you go on about your conversion. Can we step
Sure.
back to when you were talking about the age of 16 when you left the church?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Did you have, at that stage, did you have any impressions of Islam? Did you think you would ever, you know, accept the religion then? Or what can you tell us about, you know, can you think about those feelings that you were having then?
Yeah, of course. I think looking back on it now, I guess in very subtle ways, Islam was probably always in the background of my life. Like, I knew some Muslim people, and there was always some talk of it going around. But if you asked me, do you want to be Muslim, subhanAllah, I'd probably think, no, I don't believe in war, like something completely ludicrous and not related to Islam at all. I had no idea what Muslims even believe. I just had this impression that they were very strict. I had this impression basically that they were very together, and that was so not me. I had no idea actually about any of the fundamental beliefs of Islam at all.
Okay. And so this turning point that you mentioned when you were 21 and Egypt, so before that, had you explored or searched for any other religions?
Yes, it's not necessarily a religion, but I started to become increasingly, I guess you would say, spiritual, and I turned towards, although I never believed that Buddha had any divine powers or bearing, I turned towards the ideas of Buddhism or just basically living a more peaceful life and turning towards the practices like meditation. But it was just trying to make the best of a bad situation. I still believed in God, and because I think particularly in England, people have an inclination to just mix and match. Like, you can believe anything. It's you know, you can take one part of this religion and one part of that religion and just make your own answer as you go along, basically. And there was no one would bat an eyelid that was might be strange. So that's what I was doing. I was sort of chugging along. Somewhere in the really like faintest part of my heart and mind, God was still definitely there, and I was hanging on by a thread. But yeah, I was practicing anything. I was really clinging at anything. I knew that Judaism wasn't for me, and after beyond that, I couldn't find any more answers.
Okay. And back to this turning point again, when you were 21 and
Mm-hmm.
Egypt. Before that,
Mm-hmm.
had you been researching Islam at all? Were you trying to find Islam?
Nope, zero. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't even consider it. It was still very much the big unknown and the big, like, I don't need to know. I actually had the misconception that I was basically unaware that you could become Muslim. I think for the most part, I thought you are Muslim. And while you could become Muslim, it was mostly for people who were born into the faith. It just, one of those things, if you don't contemplate it, you won't find any answers. It never captured my attention. I remember I had read a couple of verses in the Quran before, and it didn't really go beyond that. I think I read the verse, it was about, indeed, we will test you with poverty and hunger and fear. And, in the West, we are so holding the belief that we are self-sufficient, and you think, my life is so contained, how could that possibly happen to me? Or that was the reality of myself and those around me. You get into the cult of like, how could I become in poverty, in loss? That would take a series of determined actions by me on my part. So I'd totally lost the connection of feeling like God is in control, I guess, looking at it now. So for that reason, it didn't enter my heart.
Okay, so now tell us about your trip to Egypt. You were 21, what happened?
Yeah, I went to Egypt, and then I met my husband and we got married. And it was at the time we were taking a trip, and one of the first things that started to happen, of course, like being in Egypt, I noticed that the Quran was playing almost everywhere we went, and there was just something about it that was honestly so moving in a way that I hadn't imagined before. And there was just something really untangible that I couldn't put my finger on, that this felt like real life. This felt like not necessarily to get taken away by this culture of people are closer to the real way of life or not, but I mean in terms of just being in an Islamic environment. So yeah, the Quran was playing everywhere, and then we were taking a trip, and we went past Mount Sinai, and my husband casually said to me, "Oh, that's the mountain where Moses was first communicated with God." And the way he said it so casually, and my heart just felt like it was in a chokehold. And suddenly, in that moment, I'm like, that's really where it happened. It happened there in front of me. And it's as simplistic as that. It's not because, in Christianity, or at least what I was brought up to believe, that Moses was instructed to build the tabernacle there. And I just didn't understand why there was all these added details. Anyway, and that was the first time after all of this like spiritual death, that I felt, wow, I feel so happy. It was a real feeling of happiness, just to feel like, yeah, reality is coming back to my life again. I'm starting to almost wake up. Then after that, I was not Muslim yet at this point. We were having a discussion about history, and honestly, in my high school, I'd never once learned about the Crusades. I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but when in my ignorance, when he started to tell me about it, I was really disbelieving. I was really suspicious, and I was like, maybe he's just saying that because obviously I went to school in England, and if there was anything like that would have happened that was huge like that, I would know about it. It wouldn't be hidden from me. It piqued my curiosity, so I went and I started learning about it. But I said to him in that moment, I feel like you're just trying to say something to make me feel like it goes both ways, that the injustice happened both ways, because I was I think at that point fearful. I started to notice that Islam had a lot of boundaries that I wasn't used to. It had a lot of black and white do's and don'ts, and that's all I saw at that point. So I was quite fearful of that, and it made me make a really horrible snap comment about basically this rivalry of trying to say, hang on a minute, my culture or what I was brought up believing is not wrong. You know when you're like, it's like that guilty conscience comment. So yeah, I then went off and started reading a little bit about Islamic history, and I started to learn more and more about how there are scientific examples within the Quran, which just totally blew me away. And it was presented to me that suddenly there were these black and white answers. As much as there were these black and white do's and don'ts, there are also these black and white answers to questions that just plague humans for centuries. And then basically in the end, finally, when I'm coming towards taking my Shahada, I'm paying attention to all of these signs. I'm wondering, I still have I think I had a very mixed understanding of what was Islam and what was culture, because of course this was all new to me. So trying to assimilate into Egyptian culture, and as a completely new or to be new Muslim, I didn't necessarily know where to draw the line. And of course there are good practices and bad practices in every culture. So I was questioning myself about, patriarchal society, and how do I feel being my place as a female here, etc., etc. Because when I had agreed to stay in Egypt, and I decided that was going to be, at that point, I thought my forever home, my friends in the UK said, retorted back with all of these, how could you do that? Do you know how they treat women out there? And just trying to instill all of this fear inside of me. At that point, I was really disappointed, because I then learned of all these prejudices that they have. And it must have, been inside of me somewhere, because when it came the time to do some documentation between myself and my then husband, there was a question that said, what religion are you? So I've been doing all of this research and asking myself all of these questions, and I was quite taken aback that there were only three choices on the form. Are you Jewish, are you Christian, or are you Muslim? And I thought, I'm overcome in my heart and my mind by this journey, but I'm at the same time I'm very scared. I don't know what's happening to me, but I just decided to go with what made the most sense. I decided to go with what felt safe. So I knew that I wasn't Jewish, and I knew that after my last experience with Christianity, I definitely wasn't Muslim. And I just ticked the box that said, yes, I'm a Muslim. And I went straight from that office then to Al-Azhar University to take my Shahada.
So this was how many years after you first arrived in Egypt?
This was about 6 to 8 months. Before that happened, I started to, I wanted it to be an intellectual journey, and I tried to focus on what does Islam say about X, Y, and Z? And oh wow, it has all of these specific ordinances to do with, wills and inheritance, and wow, other religions don't have that. But in the end, it was just so much of an emotional journey that I couldn't put it into words, and I kept just bursting into tears randomly, not knowing, having all of these questions, and basically that were based in fear, like what's going to happen to me? I'm a Muslim now, like knowing that I was already Muslim and knowing that I'd have to then take the leap. So, and this was before, and then when I saw the question on the paper, what religion are you? I was like, wow, that's the push that, that's the push that I needed, because I'd already kind of come to terms with the fact that this religion is for me. And then I had to just take a leap of faith and know that Allah was going to catch me on the other side, which I know is very different from a lot of other sisters' experiences. But each journey is definitely unique and individual.
Yeah, and can you, in that 6 months that you were in Egypt, can you remember any of the spiritual experiences and things that you would perceive as a message coming from God to tell you about Islam, or to encourage you to convert?
In terms of encouraging me to convert, really why I said the point about going to Mount Sinai first was that was really the pivotal moment for me. It was such a short moment, I guess, to describe, but it was it made such a deep impact on me. It was just like having that certain truth. It was knowing basically all of my ideas about religion had kind of been validated, like that I know that there was only one God, and that it was really, I was really being led by feeling, because when I heard sort of the Islamic story around what happened at Mount Sinai and how I compared it to what it says in Christianity, that was the sign that was just big enough for me. How it was just answer after answer after answer, and without any missing parts. Basically, when I first opened the Quran, I remember I looked at the kind of the type of literature that it was, and I'm like, this isn't right. I opened it and I thought, this isn't right. This is nothing like what I expected religious texts to look like. It's so, first of all, what struck me was how simplistic it was in the fact that like anyone could understand the message, in the fact that I wasn't getting lost in all of riddles, what I felt were riddles, and basically how one verse from the Quran could just release so much psychological tension and release so much angst, in terms of really searching for the answer where you can't find it from anywhere else. And I'm like, that is the word of God. That is undoubtedly the word of God. Yeah, that I think as well, the more I became familiarized with I want to say Egyptian culture, but also Islamic culture, because they were hand in hand. I started to notice that I have a lot of fears that I don't know how they got in there. Like, for example, my then husband said that we were going to talk to a sheikh, and as soon as he said that, I kind of froze with fear inside of myself. Like, I don't want to go. I said to myself, I don't want to go to talk to the sheikh. Like, I feel really nervous. I'm a woman. I'm a female. How can I be in there? And I realized that that's just nonsense. And I don't believe that. As a person, me, myself, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't feel unsafe. In fact, what I'm seeing with my eyes, in fact, I feel very safe, and I feel very at peace, and I feel very protected. So actually, where did that prejudice come from? And it was much about like letting go, because I had accumulated all of this, I guess what you can call it as waste, trying to adapt into a life that I felt was never my own. And it was about just letting all that go and spiritually being faced with the questions that made it easier to happen, that was also a big sign for me. For me, very much, it was afterwards. It was afterwards. I almost kind of did it, what most would consider it as the opposite way around. But almost as soon as I took my Shahada, I felt like, because I already had believed that there was no God except one God, and like I said, I felt like I was always Muslim, so I believe what is inside the Quran. If I couldn't read a passage necessarily that I disagreed with, there were very few. In terms of really getting to grips with it and becoming Muslim, like air quotes, it was after I took my Shahada. So for the first year, which is why I'm choosing that for the topic of focus for my workshop, inshallah, is all of the focus tends to be on what happens before Shahada, but what happens after? Really, what happens after? It was honestly the most powerful and testing year perhaps of my life, arguably, because there is no attention paid to it. You've just taken this massive step towards Islam. Do you expect the momentum to stop? No, of course not. It increases. We can't have all of this gear up towards Islam and then say, okay, you took your Shahada, everything is okay now. I'm really quite surprised by how many people are unfamiliar or unprepared to take on Islam as a real lifelong journey. It's a lifelong journey, and in that respect, we are definitely on a level playing field with each other. I still have, even now, 5 years down the line, I still have heartfelt, intellectually led realizations and confirmation and guidance to this is still why I'm Muslim, because you have to keep renewing your faith for all of us, for reverts, for people thinking about Islam, for people who were born Muslim 5 years, 10 years down the line. It's all, I really believe that it's a real constant labor of love.
And so you're talking now about this first year of Islam. Did you feel that you had enough support in that first year?
Clarify what you mean as support.
Well, getting good advice, following good examples, and just showing someone to show you the path.
No, I don't necessarily feel that. I mean, I had, not necessarily, to be honest. Basically, that was the most moving part of my journey, because I really felt like that was tenfold the closeness with God that I couldn't experience, and I felt was never possible to experience, because where other people had perhaps fallen short of the mark, I felt like I was just being led. I felt like I was being led. I didn't know, of course, like in the beginning, we don't know how to pray. So I was taught the very basic kind of lackluster way to pray, not in that the person was doing it in a lackluster way, but Arabic for reverts is very difficult. So I felt like Allah really made that easy for me, and Allah really chooses Muslims so purposefully, of course, because what was already inherently in me was brought out, and I could just reconnect with myself through Islam. So in many senses of the word, my support was definitely Allah in the first year.
And you were still in Egypt for this first year, or you went back home?
No, I remained in Egypt for the basically until last year.
Okay. How many years was that?
So from 2014 to 2019, so about 5 years.
And so tell us a little bit more about your first year, any struggles you had, or any really good points that you want to bring out and let the listeners understand, those who are thinking about accepting Islam. Really,
I think one of the wisest pieces of advice that I can give is ultimately and definitely primarily the thing is, it's about you and Allah only. That's the connection that you ought to seek answers for. That's the connection that you should seek to strengthen and nurture. My advice to people seeking Islam is don't pressure yourself. Trust your gut instinct. I think many people have well-meaning intentions, but we cannot expect ourselves to just take on 40 years of revelation at once. It takes time, but it's definitely purposeful, and just trust that the answers will come. Listen and the answers will come.
Okay, and at the start of the episode, we talked about your interactive workshop, which you're hoping to launch soon. It's called Surviving and Thriving, my first year after Shahada.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and how this workshop could help someone who is not yet Muslim, but they're thinking about becoming a Muslim?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for us as Muslims, or people seeking to become Muslim, it's very much, we're thinking about what is it that we're getting into, and for that we need to know what we're up against. We need to know what to prepare ourselves for. So it's very much about weighing up expectations, about how we feel our first year in Islam might be. Also, it's about the tools that we have available to utilize to help us through, and about maneuvering ourselves out of any situation that may arise. And it's definitely also about support, because also as people seeking Islam, we have this idea that we're going to potentially enter this very conservative community, or at least I held that belief. And so we have people thinking about Islam, and they're struggling perhaps with an enduring mental health condition, or they're like, hey, I'm definitely leaning towards Islam, but I'm struggling with a major addiction issue. So it's about knowing that, or gaining access to the tools and questions we can to navigate through that, and still not compromise our search for the truth.
Okay, and you mentioned, that you would introduce some of the tools that they could use. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
First and foremost, it's about reflections upon what we have in Islam. It's my first year after Shahada, so it's about these powerful questions that help us to. I really love asking questions that help us to see Islam as our superpower, because it really is. It's about holding up a mirror to someone and saying, hey, this is you, this is your journey, and where do you want it to go? So it's about holding the space for someone and asking them the questions, because more often than not, people don't reflect, or people don't give themselves the opportunity to reflect. So when we take the gift of guidance and extract the wisdom from it that we have in Islam, and we reflect upon it, and we become purposeful with it, and we make our intentions with it, we realize that we have a lot more at our disposal than we first imagined. So when we get purposeful with it, it's very powerful to think where it can lead us. It's also there is a segment in the workshop about knowing our traps. So knowing about like difficulties that reverts face in the first year, like for example, family issues, or perhaps like struggling with giving up all of the things that are not permissible in Islam. So it's about strengthening your why, and strengthening your resolve within Islam, so that you can be comfortable enough to overcome it. I think there's a huge benefit to be gained from shared understanding, with the idea that knowledge is power. Then reflection is definitely beautiful, and action is blessed. I think that when we allow ourselves to give back to each other I'm sure if I asked a group of reverts who have been in the faith for a considerable amount of time, what would you tell someone who's considering joining Islam to expect for the first year? Like, what do you wish you knew before joining Islam? So many sisters would jump to the opportunity to share advice, but it's about giving that a space to happen, because there is so much good advice and there is so much beautiful insight that we gain from this extremely powerful journey, but it's about nurturing a space for that to happen.
Okay, and I've heard a lot of people say that, accepting Islam is a process, and it's a slow process. It should be a slow process and you should not rush. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
I think I'm kind of torn on the subject personally, because, as I mentioned, I took the decision to become Muslim relatively quickly. However, and to be honest, I carried a lot of thoughts and a lot of stories about that. Like, not that I make a mistake, because to be honest, I never once looked back in my decision to be Muslim. It was the best decision I ever made in my life. However, I did carry a lot of worries about that. And it was when another sister said to me, if you're considering about joining Islam, and you believe that there is no God but one God, and you believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his final messenger, then don't delay. Take shahada, because you don't know what's going to happen. At first, I kind of it took me a while to kind of swallow that, but there is a lot of wisdom in it, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's right or wrong. Neither am I saying that taking your time is right or wrong, but I'm a huge advocate of trusting your own guts. Like, I can tell you some advice, but it's got nothing to do with your story. I could tell you a blanket statement, but it's not going to be what's right for you. Only I believe that the person themselves considering Islam is the best judge to look at what they have available to them, look at their past, look at what they want for their future, and look at what they really believe, and make the decision. I don't believe there's any necessarily right way or wrong way to convert to Islam. If you believe that that's the truth, and that's the way to convert to Islam.
Okay, and tell us about the format of the workshop. Is it a group or private, one-on-one?
No, yeah. So the workshop will be held on Zoom, inshallah, and it's a group workshop, and it will be just a couple of like exercises, and there might be some journaling, some reflective questioning, but other than that, sharing a lot of insights and togetherness, inshallah.
Okay, is it a series of workshops or just a one-off?
That itself is a one-off. Yeah.
Okay, and then do you have any? Is there going to be any follow-up events, or contact with you?
Sure, yeah. Depending on the need, I definitely am happy to show up to what shows up, and I have been, and I'm always available for one-on-one support. But in terms of following up with workshops and stuff like that, I mean, where there's a need, I will be. Where there's a need, and inshallah, I can provide some sort of support, then I will be there.
Okay. Is there any way to contact you on social media, or do you have any Facebook groups set up, or any do you have any videos on YouTube or something?
I will be releasing a video at the same time, inshallah, as the release of the workshop. So up until that point, I'm just available on my own social media account. Perhaps, inshallah, in the future, following the workshop, there will be a face.
Okay, Crystal. So this will have to be the last question here. We would like to know your best advice for anyone who's thinking about Islam. Give us a summary of what you advise that person.
my advice to somebody who is seeking Islam is, don't look left or right or to the people around you, or pay attention to anything that you feel is just noise in your head. I would really sincerely advise the person to hone in on what it is that they believe and sincerely ask, and ask again, ask for Allah's help, and really be open to the answer. The beautiful thing about Islam is that even your journey towards Islam is very purposeful, and it's by no means an accident. So when you start to ask the questions that you really believe that no one and nothing has an answer to, and you find the answer and you think, yeah, maybe that's the answer, but it makes the rest of my life so difficult, I would really sincerely advise that you just disregard that and ask the next question that leads on from that question, and the next question that leads on from that question. And you'll really find that the deeper that you go into faith, the more beautiful life becomes. And honestly, the answers will come from where you least expect. It's about your journey with Allah and nothing else.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, Crystal.
You're welcome.
So we will put your contact details into the show notes. If anyone is interested in getting in contact with you and following up on the workshop. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
It was a pleasure to be here.
And all the best for you, and also all the best for the audience and the listeners, and may peace and blessings of God be upon you.
Thank you very much. May Allah reward you. Assalamu alaikum.